True or false, if a survey that is completed on a yacht being offered for sale reveals a major problem or a defect, those findings now become material facts for future buyers on this boat.
That's false. What is the typical sales commission in residential real estate in the US?
It's right about 5 to 6%. What's the typical commission for yachts?
It's been 8 to 10%. All buyers are supposed to sign a buyer rep agreement with a broker before they go look at a house.
That is true now. What about on yachts?
That's almost never true. The vast majority of the yachting industry does not even offer a buyer rep agreement. Welcome back to the Full Displacement Podcast by Current Yachts. I'm Marilyn Bosser. I'm joined today by Sam Dorso. Welcome back to the program, Sam. How are you doing?
Hey, Marilyn. Good. How you doing? Happy to be here.
Very good to see you. We're going to talk today about how yacht sales and real estate compare. So you're going to bring the real estate component to this conversation, but we mentioned this in a prior episode, and a lot of people compare boats to houses in terms of transactions because there's a lot of similarities. Perfect example, there are brokers involved in these transactions, but there's a lot of limitations too in that comparison. And that's why I wanted to have you on this episode today to talk about how those industries compare and how the assets differ as well. So there's a few misconceptions we're going to dispel along the way. And first, perhaps tell us your background. I know you are a Florida licensed real estate broker, and so you have some experience in real estate, both commercial and residential. Speak to us about that.
Yeah, I've done some residential, some business brokerages handled under the Florida real estate license as well, and then commercial transactions as well as part of business sales. So I've been involved in a lot of residential transactions. I always stay up to all the information going on and kind of the big lawsuit that happened a couple of years ago, and just seeing how it plays into everything.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about this next because we've seen a little bit of that too in yacht sales. But the first conversation topic I had for us was comparing those assets. Obviously, real estate, we know, is generally wealth building. And we understand too that for yachts that are actually depreciating assets, there's also a bit more of an emotional component attached to it. It's much more lifestyle oriented. As Patrick Worley said in a previous episode, we'll link to it up here, buy Home Depot, charter a boat. In terms of investment, people think of real estate as wealth building. Can you comment on that and the type of clientele that you've run across over the years?
Well, yeah, I mean, historically, real estate has always been a good investment. It's always appreciated more than inflation. It's something that people know. Obviously, there's an emotional piece into it where they want to buy the nice house. They want, the great view or something. But in the back of their heads as a couple, as a family, they're realizing it's a great investment because it will appreciate. It's also an asset you can borrow money on, and there's a lot of tax benefits of it as well.
Yeah, we're going to talk about those tax advantages in a minute too. And we've also talked about lending before on this show. And there's another difference too between those assets is that you need a home to live in because that's like a primary need. You don't need to buy a boat. And therefore, there are also going to be differences on the lending side. But we're going to start with how those assets compare. Luxury buyers in your market, you're in Jupiter, Florida, right? What type of
Correct.
price
Yes.
points are you talking about?
Well, it's funny. The median home really went up over the past few years. Probably somewhere, it used to be around 300. It's probably closer to 500, 550 now. But here in Jupiter, we really have some high net worth individuals in the 10, $20 million range. So it really goes, all over the place. And in Jupiter, probably the average would be somewhere around $1 million. If I had to guess.
And it is quite similar in my region because I'm out of Annapolis. Our county also has median price, I was just checking earlier, is somewhere around $500,000. And you're going to really have a hard time finding a home to live in below, say, $400,000 in this area. However, of course, on the high end of the market, you're going to have those waterfront properties and you're going to have those custom homes. And so, again, here we're talking about a similarity to yachting where you're going to have entry-level boats and you're going to have the larger yachts and then you're going to have the super yacht. And then at the extreme, you've got the mega yachts So it's very interesting because, again, you're going to have more affluent buyers, and then there's going to be different motives. It's not just about buying a boat for entertainment. There's going to be those tax advantages that we're going to open up a little bit later. So next, I wanted to talk with you about the regulation that surrounds those industries and how well consumers are protected. We're going to talk first about licensing, because licensing provides, of course, a level of protection, some oversight. And the first thing we can talk about is the fact that the real estate industry is really highly regulated. The fact that you're a licensed broker or a licensed real estate agent speaks volume, and that is a requirement of every state in the United States. But speak to your experience with continued education and those sort of things.
Yeah, so Florida is obviously very strict. They want to protect the consumer in a real estate transaction, and it is required to have a Florida real estate salesperson's license first if you want to be involved in a transaction and receive compensation. You have to have that license if you're involved in any part of the transaction. So even in open houses, an administrative person can't give many details. They can hand out brochures. It's very defined on what they can do and what they can't do. So here in Florida, we get the licensing, and then to keep that licensing, you have to every 2 years you have to take continuing education classes. Some people like myself have gone off and gotten their broker's license, which means you've done it for a few years. Now you can actually run a brokerage office and manage other agents. But it is something that Florida does take very seriously here.
Do you know if there's also something similar to what I know of in Maryland? Because I was at one point a real estate agent here. The Maryland Real Estate Commission is very robust, and they provide, of course, the oversight for the licensing, the enforcement. There's a fund for brokers and consumers to handle disputes. I mean, it's a huge machine behind this industry, and yet I don't know. I mean, is Florida the same, first of all?
It is. It's the same. There's a fund that realtors, part of their dues have to go into this fund for claims and lawsuits and just that same thing.
Yeah, fascinating. In the yacht brokerage world, and we touched on this before, there is a licensure requirement in Florida and California that's pretty well delineated. There's other states that mention a dealership or a brokerage license, but the rules are very fuzzy, and I can come back to that in a second. Speaking of Florida licensing for yacht brokers, it requires a 2-year apprenticeship under an employing broker that it becomes your mentor, but there is no federal regulation. Association that's most prominent in our industry, or one of the larger ones anyway, is called the IYBA, and it used to be the Florida Yacht Broker Association, and it's now more global, and that's what the name implies. International Yacht Broker Association, that's what it stands for. They have their own code of ethics, and again, that's a voluntary opt-in, right? You don't have to oblige by any rules, really, beside the fact that you get licensed and yes, you have a bond in Florida, and you have to have E&O insurance, error and omission. I mean, those are critical points. However, the bond that is paid is only $10,000. Those are very small amounts compared to the size of assets that we're talking about. So I always like to drive the point home when we speak with our clients. Do your due diligence about the yacht brokers that you're talking with. Some of them will just not be licensed at all, and they don't have much to show. Sometimes there will be some certification like CPYB. There are a few labels, let's say, to show that you are one of the good guys, but often there is really nothing. And another fact that's a little scary, there is no licensing required for finance brokers in yachts.
Wow, scary.
When you're a lender in real estate, you need to be licensed.
Highly regulated. Absolutely. Yeah.
So something to think about. And we don't have continued education as yacht brokers. We take it upon ourselves to stay on top of product knowledge and technology, and stay in the know about what is happening in the marketplace. But there is very little oversight in the rest of the country. So I can speak again. We mentioned it before. The state of Maryland has some rules, but they don't seem to know actually what they are or how they apply. We've been trying to get an answer and keep asking. And as far as we know, being a Florida-based brokerage firm in Florida, with a broker like me, I'm a yacht broker, licensed Florida yacht broker, but residing in Maryland, I do not have a requirement to have a license, but I asked just to be sure. Nobody could answer me. I don't believe that there is. We're considering opening an office here now in Annapolis. And now I would like to know, does having an office now require me to have this license? Because I'm still a Florida licensed and headquarters and registered business. Still, they could not answer me, which is insane. So then I can't imagine that a consumer would have much luck in trying to go after an unlicensed yacht broker that did them wrong. And for background, every yacht brokerages in this world can list boats anywhere. So I also asked the question, if a Rhode Island yacht brokerage company has a boat listing in Maryland and the boat sits in the water in Maryland, does that require then that they have a license? Because they were trying to tell me that that's how things work. And I'm like, no, I don't think you understand the extent of how this is just not enforceable. And it's already like very delinquent if you have to go down that route.
It's a
So
pretty scary gray area. Yeah.
definitely gray area. I also wanted to add, you mentioned that NAR settlement. Do you want to talk about that lawsuit that changed a lot of the rules recently for the real estate
Yeah.
profession?
Yeah, and it happened a few years ago. And what happened was a few sellers of real estate felt that they were paying too high fees in commission. And the lawsuit was that the sellers would sign an agreement saying that they have to pay a 6% commission or 5% or whatever it is. And then a portion of that would be given to the buyer's agent. But the seller didn't feel it was fair that they were paying for the whole thing. They felt the buyer should be paying the commissions, which it's kind of a weird thing because the money comes out of the buyer brings all the money to the table. So it's the seller proceeds where the commissions gets taken out of. But ultimately what happened was because there's a MLS system for realtors, the way the system was, it was forcing them to put a commission in there. And that's really where the lawsuit was focused on. So after the lawsuit, there was, over $400 million was paid, and they agreed to change some of the rules. And that is that now any buyer that wants to look at a house has to sign an agreement understanding that they'll be on the hook for that commission if the seller is not willing to pay for that. It doesn't mean they'll have to pay for it. It just means that if the seller is not willing to pay for that. So it's brought a lot of friction into the industry. Obviously, a new real estate broker or agent that's very difficult for them to try to get a buyer that they have. Would you like to go see a house? Here, sign this agreement. And that's I've heard funny stories about that. And buyers say, I don't just met you. I'm not going to agree to pay you money out of my pocket if I buy a house. So high level, what really happened is that it's not in the MLS anymore. So when the buyers look, they have no idea how much the commission is. Really what happens is the buyer's agent will usually call the seller's agent, listing agent, and say, what's the commission on there? What's the split? Okay, cool. And that's it. They still have to get that buyer to sign an agreement, but people have done a one-day agreement, just that house agreement, all kinds of things like that. So in the grand scheme of things, there really haven't been that many changes. The commission is still coming out of the total price. The sellers are usually still paying the full commission because it behooves them to do that to get activity on their house, to get as many people to look at it.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people realize too, it's a math equation. The money is coming from somewhere. You just have to know what's included in that offer and how that commission, if there is one, how it's paid out and who benefits from that commission and what you get out of it, which is why real estate or yachting, you want to have your own representation because otherwise you're leaving money on the table. And to that end, I will link below in the description to the video we produced on how co-brokerage works in yachting because it is a little tricky. There's one thing I wanted to respond to in regards to whether or not a commission is offered in the MLS. You're going to have an option now that just says yes or no. It's obviously open for a broker to collaborate, but then you have to pick up the phone and find out what that amount is.
Yeah, that's the real world. They just call, they find out what the commission will be. And, some buyer agents won't show a house if there's no commission. That's what
Of course,
will
I mean,
happen.
I could see how this happens. However, that's why buyer representation agreements are there. So we'll talk about that in just a second. What's interesting is yachting has been this way for a long time. So in the back end of, say, Yacht World, a broker, a listing broker will enter the details of a boat and will indicate whether or not the boat is open for co-brokerage. And so when you are browsing for boats as a buyer rep and you're trying to help them with their purchase, you can, if you don't have a buyer rep agreement that spells out what commission they would pay you if no one's playing ball on the listing side, you would just eliminate those that are not open for co-brokerage. But it gets also tricky and there's friction because on Yacht World, which is, I guess, closest we have to the MLS for boats, and there are a few other platforms, but this is the one that most people know, the buyer does not know whether or not the boat's open to co-brokerage. There is no ticker for them to say, hey, your broker will be paid through this commission split. So it is very fuzzy, but it has been for a long time. And it's the first two questions we ask when we contact a listing broker is there a seller disclosure? Is there a condition disclosure about this vessel that we should know about? And what are the co-brokerage terms? And so we like to have this in writing usually, but we use this information to share with our buyer because then they know what to expect because with us they sign a buyer broker agreement. And so if there is no compensation on the other side that will come to us to pay us for our services, the buyer knows they're responsible for it. And that comes back to what I was saying. It's just math. You have to know if the price that is being asked already includes a commission for your broker or not, and you make your offer accordingly. So I know it can trip people up, but at the end of the day, it's the buyer that pays all the commissions, right? It's through that offer. So
Absolutely.
we have to keep that in mind.
Yeah, one interesting thing I've seen in real estate, I think most people feel when they see a listing, they feel like they should call the listing broker because they'll get accurate information, that the listing broker will know everything about the house. But that's really not a good idea because by not having a buyer agent, you give up so much. You know, a buyer agent is really like your own lawyer in the fight. And what happens when you call the listing broker, at least here in Florida, is first the listing broker was representing the seller, and so, but now once you contact them, and they're gonna turn into a transaction broker, which means they're not going to have a fiduciary duty to either party. They're more like a referee that's just going to go, keep the deal together. They want it to close so they get their commission, but they're not going to tell you if you should offer less money or what the seller will accept or anything like that. So one thing, having a buyer agent, they're protecting your interests the whole way. They want to make sure you get the best deal. Anything they know that they can help you, they will tell you. It's crazy how many people don't realize that and they don't follow that.
Good
Like, one
point
more
too
thing.
about agency, because that's what we're touching on. It essentially is the same with yachting. If you are contacting the listing broker, they are going to try and work with you because the commission, as we'll discuss in a minute, is set upfront for the full transaction. And so they'll make double the money if there is no broker involved on the buyer side. Of course, it's attractive. As a buyer, as you just discussed, you want someone in your corner. Houses, boats, same thing. Don't call that listing agent that's not helping you. You're leaving money on the table and you're losing an advocate to support you, provide you with the right data to make the best offer. And again, it's not the way to do it. Another point that you just mentioned is having a representation agreement guarantees that this person has your interest at heart. It's that
Yeah,
fiduciary
yeah.
responsibility. If you contact a broker and you don't have a signed agreement with them, and that broker helps you look at boats and gives you a couple showings, and finally you like one boat very much and you're trying to, put an offer together, just keep in mind the buyer that you're working with, unless you sign something, they are de facto a sub-agent of the listing broker. True in both real estate and yachting, correct?
Yeah, I mean, really the funny way to look at it is this way. When I list the house, I find a broker and I feel really good that they're a bodyguard. They're going to protect me. And now a buyer comes along and calls them directly. Now my bodyguard has to also protect them. So it's kind of a really weird situation that ends up happening, and the consumers don't realize that. I think that's, it's too bad. That's when they have to get their lawyers involved to kind of protect their interest. And now you get more parties in there. And so really, in a perfect world, at least in my opinion, each side of the transaction would have their own agent. There's commission in there, which will be split. So both parties will get paid. And that's the cleanest way to do it. In Florida here, a lot of the transactions I've done in the past have been as a transaction broker, just because I've had the listing, buyers have called me, we've done the deals, and it's worked out really well. I've gotten both sides of the commission on that. Obviously, I enjoy that, but from a pure standing or pure safety for each party, it's better to have your own agent.
And that is why on the buyer broker representation agreement that Current Yachts offers, we give people the choice to opt out of being presented with our own Current Yachts listing, because that would present that sticky situation. Whether we call it dual agency or transaction broker, it comes down to the same situation. Ideally, each party has their own broker from different brokerage houses. So, very good point. And so I wanted to add, we have seen, I guess, copycat lawsuits from the real estate industry into the yachting industry.
I'm
And
sure.
the jury is still out. I don't think all of these have gone away fully, but there were a lot of conversations around, is there price fixing in yacht sales. And it's hard to really argue the point in a lot of ways, but also the way that the arguments was made was probably a bit awkward. And so that didn't help the case. Returning now to that commission conversation, we touched on that lawsuit a little bit. And so it's a really nice segue into, people felt that the real estate commissions were too high. And what is the typical real estate commission?
It's around 5 to 6%. 6 is on the higher end, but 5 is about where they end up.
Okay. And I know in Maryland, for having worked on a listing agreement recently, the split commission actually must be included in your listing agreement. So if your broker says, well, I'm going to list your house for you, it's going to be 5%. If we collaborate, we'll give them 2.5%. And so it is spelled out in the agreement. And I don't know if
Interesting.
that's the case in Florida, is it?
It's not the case in Florida here in the listing agreement. Nope, just the total agreement, the total commission is listed on the agreement and everything's worked out after that. It is assumed that it will be split evenly. And in most cases, when the listing agent's talking to the seller, that's how they'll tell them, we want to have as much commission so that we can attract as many buyers, and we split it 50-50.
Very interesting. So in yachting in general, there is also a splitting of the commission, but the standard or the normal traditional yachting commission is 8 to 10% of the sale price, which is it's up there, right? When you're talking about a
Yeah.
$2 million boat, that's a significant stash of cash. Now, what we're seeing, of course, is what you're describing here. The splits are actually not always 50-50 in boats. There are going to be different brokerage firms that will use what they call reciprocation. So if you discuss or work on a prior listing and you present them with certain terms, they will say, well, we're going to offer the same term you gave us. But in a lot of ways, that doesn't really make sense for our model because at Current Yachts, our sellers choose the co-brokerage terms. So if they want to
Interesting.
open to co-brokerage and they say, well, I'm going to offer 3% on the other side, which is pretty much what we get paid on the listing side. It's not a percentage, but if we go to a listing broker and they learn of a 3% split on a other listing, they will offer a 70-30 split on the next boat that we look at with a different client, which is not correct. It's also hurting them because, again, our buyer will make their offer in consideration of how much they're keeping, which maybe makes their listing broker's pockets a little fatter, but it doesn't actually play in the seller's favor because they net less money. We did the math. So the bottom line is it should be a 50-50 split. It's not always. Some yacht brokerages that have been established longer tend to also offer less favorable splits to smaller brokerages because they feel like they're not going to return that favor. That small brokerage is unlikely to do more deals with me in the future. So I'm not that incentivized to give you a 50-50. So it might be a 60-40. And another thing that can change and impact the split is how much you do as a buyer broker. So if you are unable to attend the survey for any reason, it may be a planned absence or not, but that actually decreases your share of the split, which that I
That
do
actually makes
understand.
sense. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a common sense. With the higher commission rates, commercial real estate also has the 8 to 10% typical rates, as do business sales here in Florida, same thing. Although typically it'll be a 10% for sales of businesses under a million, and then they'll do something called a modified Lehman formula, which it'll go 10, 8% for the second million, 6%, and so forth until it gets to 2% over 5 million. But yeah, very interesting.
Yeah, there's a bit of a tiered commission too for very large multi-million-dollar vessels, which, again, that is a little bit less common. But it is very interesting to see that not only does yachting have fewer regulations, it's more aggressive from the collaboration standpoint, it's expensive for the seller. This is how Current Yachts came about. We wanted to offer an alternative and be a sensibly priced option with top service. You can have it all. With Current Yachts, our clients choose their level of service for their media presentation. We're very transparent about the co-brokerage terms, and the seller decides how much to compensate a co-broker. We talked too earlier about the appreciating versus depreciating asset class in real estate versus yachting. And that's another interesting point here that makes the sensitivities a little bit heightened. In boats, every commission dollar comes out of an already shrinking asset. So you're very much more likely to be upside down. Can you speak to that in real estate a bit? Do people end up upside down with houses at all?
They do in certain markets, depending on the loans that they take. Back in 2008 with the mortgage crisis, there were people that do maybe a 5% down. And at some points, there was even cash out with no money down. And it was crazy times back then. Now it's not the same. Buyers have skin in the game a lot more. The lenders are much stricter. And I think that's really good in general, just to keep the whole industry and the economy intact. So, but yeah, sure. If people buy on the high end of the market and they need to sell within a couple of years and now it's corrected, then they will have to come out of pocket to pay the commissions. So it does get a little tight, but I'm sure it's not, the same with yachting or boats in general.
Yeah, especially because boats will typically have 20 or 25% down, and the depreciation in the first 2 or 3 years can easily eat up 20 or 25% of the
Yeah,
original
sure. I'm
purchase price.
sure.
So it
Yeah.
doesn't take much for that scale to tip the other way. And this is often why when we guide our clients in buying new versus used, a lot of our clients prefer to buy a boat that's 2 to 4 year old, where the systems are still in good shape and the boat's kind of broken in, but you don't have to take the lion's share of that depreciation. So very different asset class from that standpoint of depreciation. And since we are on the subject of types of asset, I wanted to have a special segment around tax treatment and how the rules may be different. So both assets are depreciable, but the mechanisms, the tools that are available may be different. So please talk to your tax advisor or your CPA. I'm not a licensed financial advisor, but in general, we know everybody understands that there are things like the real estate industry will have the 1031 exchanges. That's something that is pretty common. A lot of boat owners in the higher price points become familiar with bonus depreciation, which can allow a full write-off in the first year of purchase when there is a commercial application, when it's a boat as a business structure. Now, some boats are eligible as second homes, and therefore, just like you do on your primary home, you may have some write-offs available, like your mortgage interest and insurance. On yachts, you could only do that if you were running an active business or using the yacht as a second home, as I mentioned, but something new may be changing that. And I'm going to quote, there's a new bill proposed to offer relief for smaller boat buyers. And so that was just introduced this week. The legislation aims to help buyers of American-made boats by making boat ownership more affordable and supporting marine manufacturers and retailers. So we'll see how that pans out. That's not already through, but I just wanted to point this out. It's very relevant to the conversation we were having, and it's basically for annual interest deduction on boat loans up to $10,000, and it's going to be available potentially through 2028 for loans that are going to be booked after December 31, 2024. So I'll put the link to that resource below, and we can talk about that some more. And besides some of the tax write-off that may be available, there's other ways to be smarter with how you manage your monies around those larger assets. Financing arbitrage is one. Even though you may be a cash buyer, sometimes folks will decide to finance an asset like a yacht because they realize that it's more advantageous to have a loan on that asset, on that yacht, for say 6.5% versus having that cash tied up into the boat. And instead, right now, that portfolio can earn, say, 10 or 12%. So that difference to them means that they're better off financing the vessel. I don't know if people do this in real estate as well.
They definitely do that in commercial real estate. They will do that. In residential real estate, I don't see it that much. It obviously makes sense because the interest is also tax deductible. So of course, if you can keep your money in your investments, it makes more sense to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Another tool I wanted to mention for those who are looking to borrow, but instead of doing an classic underwriting with a lender, they may be able to borrow against a portfolio. So talk to a financial institution to see if that's available to you. And again, to go back to what Sam was saying, we're going to see that it makes more sense often to keep your investments where they are, avoid the penalty, don't cash out on that IRA, and instead do the lending and use those assets to show your eligibility for that loan in yachting anyway, real estate perhaps too. Sam, another topic, a very important one I wanted to cover with you is how the transactions are similar and also have their own specificities when we compare yacht sales and the real estate market. When it comes to pricing, for example, I believe we both use comps, whether it's real estate or boat sales, but the boat data, I will say, is definitely shakier. So I'll start and I'll tell you that the sold boat data is not public. So we access various data sources, including the backend of, say, the Yacht World platform. There are other platforms that are emerging and growing. And so we try to gather and aggregate all of this together. The problem is it's become a little bit unreliable. There's not a great mechanism to verify that the reported data is accurate. So you can see how it could be a little shakier. Now, real
Yeah.
estate's much easier, right?
Yeah, everything's public, so any buyer can get any information on what the house sold for every single time it's sold. It's all public record. It's great when transactions or when the market is kind of going a certain way. As soon as the market slows down a little bit, that's when you run into some issues because here in Florida, 2 years ago, we were at the high and, some of the sales were really high. And so anybody who wants to sell now, well, they heard that their neighbor sold for X, they obviously want that amount of money. And so in these types of markets, you'll see people pricing it a little bit too high, and the good brokers will coach their seller and try to get recent comparables. And luckily, again, we have so much data that you can find recent comparables. Usually, maybe not in the neighborhood, but the next neighborhood. So yeah, that's the one part of our industry that's great. There's always some defending of a price based on comparables, or if it's priced too high, you can go and kind of attack that using the comparables.
Yeah, and the other tool that you have built into the process, whether or not lending is involved, it's required when a lender comes into the picture to finance the purchase. But the appraisal, there are licensed appraisers that can give you a valuation of this property to ensure you're not overpaying. And so the lender is comforted in the value of the asset for which the loan is being created. In yachts, there is no such thing. There is no appraiser. So what do we have? Do we have basically a few, again, we don't have a national MLS platform. So we have some various data sources that we use. We have the expertise of surveyors that can share with us, the data that they have, but it's very spotty at best. And
Yeah.
that is also another reason why it's much easier to be underwater when you buy a boat at the high point and perhaps you're not really paying attention to the market trends. What about disclosures? Tell me how that is pretty strict in real estate, right?
It is, and I've seen in some cases, at least here in Florida, just say you make a deal to sell the house. The buyer wants to do an inspection, which that's very typical, and they come in and they find a defect in the house, something that's material that me as the seller didn't even know. Once you hear that as a seller, you can't unknow it. You have to disclose it to any buyers that come forward. So that's it definitely protects the buyers. So for example, a cracked foundation in a house, obviously that's going to be expensive to fix. If one buyer walks away, the next buyer that comes has to be told that that's a material defect, and they need to realize that they're going to have to shell some money down if that becomes an issue. Is that the same way in yacht sales?
Not quite. First, I'll say that the disclosures that are made up front, because when you do a listing, typically you have a slew of documents that are, backed by those industry association on the real estate side, right? And you have to disclose things like flood zones and whatever. It is not like that at all in yachting. There is usually just a yes or no question. Do you have any disclosure about the condition of this vessel? And that's it. On the listing agreement that Current Yacht signs with our sellers, we actually have a very detailed, pick list of different items that could have been part of a disclosure statement. Lightning strikes, grounding, warranty recalls from the factory. Like all of these things are so essential. We're very thorough with our disclosures. And so at the time a buyer makes an offer on one of our listing, we will have provided that disclosure statement. This is all known up front, as much as the seller is aware. So we'll come back to the survey on boats and the home inspection. I just wanted to add one other thing. The status of a boat in terms of duty payment is very critical. And there is a mention on those platforms that says sometimes, not for sale in U.S. waters to U.S. residents. There are some very strict rules in regards to boats being offered for sale, even if not been imported to the United States. So as much as generally there's just a lot of loosey-goosey going on in the yachting industry, there are some regulations that are very important that brokers and their clients can't ignore. And so the duty status of your vessel is one. There are a few regulations around EPA and the source of woods products on the vessel. That's called the Lacey Act. If a boat has now been imported, if it is in the United States, a Florida licensed broker, for example, is not allowed to set foot on the vessel to show this boat to a client. They could see their license
Interesting.
revoked. So there's a lot of things that are a little bit unique to certain markets or unique to yachts that people outside of our industry do not realize. Coming back to inspections and surveys, you had mentioned that when there is an inspection report on a property that comes back and is being talked about and negotiated, it's usually shared in its entirety with the seller, and that becomes material fact for that house or that condo. Is that right?
It might not be shared in entirety, but obviously, if there's something material, it's going to be brought out because a lot of times the buyer will back out of the deal. That's how the seller will find out about it. So that specific piece they will know. They won't get the whole report unless they request the report.
Understood. So in our industry, the equivalent of the home inspection is the marine survey. There are different levels of surveys. In a pre-purchase survey, it's pretty thorough. And so there's not only a visual, but underway inspection. The trial run is your chance to make sure that everything runs properly. The boat is usually hauled out and looked at from underneath because that's where all the running gear is. And those are expensive components. So you want to make sure everything looks
Sure.
good and that the hull integrity is strong. So you would be concerned with roof, foundation, HVAC, plumbing, and electric. We're concerned with all the same, but we're also concerned with the propulsion, the condition of the hull, because it's, going to be sitting in water, usually a salty environment. So all of these things truly matter. But what is very different is if something is brought to the seller and is often the ground for negotiations, and sometimes those negotiations don't go anywhere, the seller is not obligated to use these findings as material facts to disclose on their listing.
Interesting.
Sorry.
Yeah. Yeah.
So then you have to rely on the honesty of the brokers that are involved, because a broker in good faith should not be representing a product according to just the word of a seller versus materials facts that have been found. So it's definitely a gray area. We will leave it to the good judgment of your yacht broker, but
Yep.
it's not like real estate. And so after the marine survey, if everybody is happy with the terms that they've had in this agreement, usually that's on the buyer side, that some things can come up. Oh, I didn't realize this doesn't work, or this is, expired, or I need to make this upgrade or whatever. There's conversations that can take place. This is where brokers are hugely important. They help mediate, they help de-escalate, take the emotions out of it. And hopefully there is still a deal on the table, sometimes adjustment in the price. Very similar in real estate post inspection.
Yeah, very, very, very similar. And just to show the value of even the having that buyer's agent again, even a transaction broker in general, a lot of times, selling real estate or commercial real estate or businesses, even more businesses, each side will have a lawyer. And basically what lawyers do, they're going to represent their party at the detriment of the other party. And so having them without a broker in the middle to kind of keep everything going, mediator, the value is huge. So when I see people trying to sell directly to a buyer with no broker, it's really difficult because they kind of have that attitude and they're fighting and there's nobody in the middle. So the whole process works really well when it is working. If you have a great broker, whether it's transaction broker or there's a listing broker and buyer brokers, they really keep the transaction together. And then when those bad things come up, there's at least, okay, well, let's look at it from both sides of it instead of it just becomes a deal right away.
Yeah, I so agree with you. It's invaluable. And also, when you're dealing directly to parties without a broker, you don't know where they are. You don't know what they know. You don't know what baggage they bring with them in terms
Yeah.
of personalities or emotions or financial stress. And so the broker is not only very valuable, but their education is just critical, because you don't know what comes next. Or you may not realize, oh, I should have done this. I should have had this affidavit of removal from the state of Florida. I don't know what that is. So again, having the right people by your side and surrounding yourself with the professionals in that transaction is very important. So that's what we do at Current Yachts, and that's why we have this podcast. So please continue to watch and subscribe. Any parting words, Sam? We'll see you on the docks in Palm Beach maybe at the end of March.
Absolutely. I'll be there.
Can't wait to see you guys there. Let us know what other topics you'd like Current Yachts and Full Displacement to cover in the comments below. Thanks for your time and for watching. Fair winds.